It's been a while since I posted my original video about the aerated concrete hive, and some of you have been asking about how this hive has done. So I want to give an update and share with you some things that are changing with this hive. First off, I just want to say in general, the bees seem to have taken to this hive really well. The colony has been busy all season long. They actually cast a swarm earlier this season, but the colony that was left behind from that swarm has also been really strong, and so that's been really encouraging. In addition, I saw something really interesting when I went to harvest honey this summer. This spring was disappointing for me for my honey harvest. We had such a wet spring that I believe the bees just had trouble drying and curing the honey to an acceptably low moisture level. Even my productive colonies, the ones that stored up lots of nectar, really didn't have a whole lot of capped honey for me to harvest. The one exception in my apiary was this colony that was in the concrete hive. This aerated concrete is a really porous material, and I really think that that porous concrete helped to draw the moisture out of the interior of the hive and help the bees to dry the honey. While I really wasn't able to pull any frames from any of my other hives, I was able to pull 6 frames of capped honey from this hive. One thing that I noticed about the hive as I was putting it together is that the cover boards laid right on top of the frames. And so, as I mentioned when I put it together, the bees were going to propolize those cover boards down. Shelley Hive actually adapted that into the new design of the hive. And they sent me a new set of cover boards and video instructions on how to cut this hive to adapt it to the new longer cover boards. So these will leave a gap between the frames and the cover boards to give that bee space so the bees won't be gluing these directly to the frames. Something else that I mentioned in that original video is my intention to do some measurements between the Shelley hive and an insulated Layens hive. I plan to put some temperature sensors in each of those hives so that I could see the differences of how the insulated hive and the aerated concrete hive manage the interior temperatures. I have those temperature sensors from Broodminder. I got 4 temperature sensors. I'm going to put 2 in each of the hives. One will go at the bottom of the hive and one will go at the top of the hive. Because the Layens frames touch and make a solid ceiling over top of the bees, I'm going to lay that thermometer on top, and to try to take an equivalent measurement inside the Shelley hive, I'll put the thermometer in here on top of the cover boards. Along with the temperature sensors, I also got this little module, which I forget what Broodminder calls it, but it basically, each of the temperature sensors connects to this via Bluetooth, and this uploads the data to the Broodminder app. This will be mounted out here by the hives where it's in close proximity to those sensors. Inside of its little pouch, Broodminder says that is important to keep UV light away from the sensor, and it'll go inside of this little basically weather protector, which I will mount probably on one of these hive stands. I think it'll be really interesting to collect that data and monitor that for both of these hives and compare that over the course of winter. I've already actually condensed each of these hives for winter and prepared them for winter, but I'm going to open them up today and take care of this maintenance. Number 1, putting in the Broodminder temperature sensors, and number 2, modifying this hive to take those longer cover boards. It's going to be interesting cutting this concrete to put those new cover boards on, but what I plan to do is to cut a piece of cardboard to cover this entire area and use blue painter's tape to go around the corners to basically keep the bees inside, because those vibrations are probably not going to make them very happy. And that'll also protect the interior of the hive from the dust and debris from cutting that concrete. First thing, I'm going to put in these temperature sensors, or at least I'm going to put in the first temperature sensor and then close this back up. And I'm going to put it pretty close to the entrance. Got a wax moth larvae here that's burrowing into this frame, and I'm hoping that by raising up the cover boards, the bees will better be able to patrol and take care of any issues going on top of the frames. So we'll get that out of here. Now, as I put these in here, it's hard to be consistent because these deep Langstroth frames are 9 inches and the Layens frames are about 16 inches deep, so that's quite a difference there. But I think the best I can do for comparison between these is to put a sensor on the floor of each hive, and then, like I said, put a sensor above the frames on top of the cover boards in this hive and on top of the frames in the Layens hive. I'm expecting the floor in the Layens hive is going to be cooler than the floor in this hive just because of that height difference. But it'll be interesting to see when I average the temperatures between those sensors what we come up with as far as an average temperature in the hive, and also to watch trends to see how much the temperatures fluctuate within each of the hives. And to try to be fairly consistent, I'm going to try to put these sensors similar distance from the entrances of the hives, pretty close to the entrances. This entrance is even with about the 4th frame. So I'm going to go over, well, we'll just say 2 frames from the entrance. I'm going to see if I can do this without pulling all the frames out. I may have to do that. If I can move this whole section of frames over. Something else I found interesting about this hive, because it's a long Langstroth hive, when it comes to overwintering, it's similar to the same concept as overwintering in a single deep brood box. And I did that a couple years ago. I overwintered 3 hives in single deeps, and it worked. But one thing that frustrated me about it is that I had to feed the bees significantly to get them to store up enough winter reserves on those frames that I was comfortable they were going to be prepared for winter. In this hive, however, and maybe it's the difference of the horizontal hive that they never had boxes on top, when I inspected this and winterized them, they have a significant amount of resources in here for winter. Let me pull a frame, even though I said I wasn't going to. So this is about the middle frame. I think I actually have 11 frames in here. If I bring this to the camera, you can see they got pretty good honey stored around that, with some brood still in the middle of that frame. And below that honey band, they're storing, above that brood, they're storing up nectar as well. So they're kind of backfilling that. So I feel like they've got a pretty good amount of winter resources, and each of the frames has about that much, or even maybe a little better. And I've got my gap now. I'm going to set this aside to give myself space here, and this is marked Shelley bottom, and that's important because I have each of these temperature sensors designated in the app based on where they're going in the hive. So I wanted to make sure to be clear about where these are going to go in the hive. All right, so I'll set that in there. It looks like the tail on there is sized, at least for the Langstroth box. So when you put this end up against the wall, it puts the sensor part right into the middle of the hive. So that's pretty handy if you're dealing with Langstroth. Now we'll put these frames back. And I would put my divider board right here, except this frame is kind of bumped out and it's going to have that honey right up against that divider board. So this frame is actually fairly empty, but it just serves as a spacer for that divider board. I actually just did a honey harvest, and so I'm going to take those frames and put them back into this hive. I had set them out, let the bees clean them out, so they're pretty empty now, but we're just going to put them back in here to store them over winter. In total, when I harvested, I got 6 frames in the summer, and then I pulled 2 more this fall, so that's 8 total. I just put 7 back in there, but one of them was actually a frame from the cutout I did that this colony, well, the original colony that this one is descended from, came from several years ago. halfway there. So this is a quick look at what was cut off. You can see the cuts there. So along the top of that cardboard, which is where that metal ledge is, and then just cutting off about a ½ inch by ½ inch section here. So it just kind of snaps out there. Now I have a little foam sanding block I'm going to run along there to try to even things up after I vacuum this dust out like I did over on the other side. That should smooth things out a little bit. This whole process is because my hive was designed for the old cover boards. This is not something you would have to do if you get a Shelley hive that has the new cover boards. Well, they're not rushing out to greet me. So this is the frame that we put that sensor under. So I'll put the other sensor just on top of that. So now the cover board leaves a nice gap there. It's just about a 3/8 inch gap above the frames, which is just what we want for bee space. Rest up above there, but still leave space on top of there to put foam insulation. And although those boards resting right on top of the frames wasn't a huge issue as far as removing them, you could pry them up without too much trouble. It is nice to be able to put the cover boards on without having to get the bees out of the way. We've got our Shelley top temperature sensor here. Set that right there. Well, I need to put my divider board in. And another nice thing, because I always lift my divider boards off the bottom of the hive a little bit, that caused this board to raise up a little bit above the level of the frames. Well, now this board can still lay down flat and kind of just matches right up. Alright, perfect fit. Covers it nicely. We've got our brood minder in there. Now I'll just put down the foam insulation. We'll get it covered up and we'll go put our sensors in the Layens hive. According to their instructions, for winter you want the reflective side down, basically reflecting the heat back into the hive. And I am particular enough, I want my foam sheet to match up. So there we go. And it does bump up a little bit where that brood minder is. The blocks for the cover will press that down. These blocks hang over the edge a little bit. I like to set it so that the front edge overhangs while the back edge is just about flush. That gives a little bit more of a drip cover on the front of the hive. Closed up and ready for winter. Although the Layens insulated hives typically come with a ventilated lid, I do put insulation in all of my lids. So this has rock wool insulation, about 3 inches of rock wool insulation inside of the lid. So like the Shelley Hive, we've got an insulating value above the bees as opposed to ventilation. And that gives about a 3/4 inch space above the frames where there's an air space there. And so this is where I'm going to put that other temperature sensor. But I need to open this up to put the one on the inside. And our entrance is right here, so right by this frame. So we'll just go over like we did in the other hive, go over 2 frames, and that's where we're going to put our temperature sensor. Now these frames that are in this hive, these are extra frames that I moved to the opposite side of the divider board in order to condense this colony back to where they have a fairly dense population for winter. However, these frames are, well, this one has a bunch of hive beetles on it. They have about half and half honey and nectar in there. So these are resources. I see the bees over here working on these. They could be storing up additional resources, or they could be drawing honey out of those and storing it over here on the other side. I've mentioned in other videos about winterizing the hive, but the standard practice I use is to have the number of brood frames with a honey band at the top that the bees can effectively cover, and then a full honey frame on each end. And I guess I really could put those other frames back in with these. Maybe that would protect them a little better from the potential that hive beetles move in, but I don't want to run the risk of that colony getting too spread out, and then if the temperature suddenly drops, having those bees form small clusters where they have less chance of survival. As you can see, they cover the frame pretty well. This is a brood frame. They've still got some capped brood on there. There's our queen right in the middle of that frame. Just happened to pull that one. Lucky chance of finding her, I guess, because I went straight to the middle of the colony. We've got our Layens bottom temperature sensor here, and I guess I'm gonna have to turn this so I can put it in the middle, because the dimensions on this aren't going to put it in the middle of the hive. If I put that end up against the wall, it's going to be pretty close to the entrance. So we'll turn it sideways. So that sensor will still be right underneath the frame, right in the middle of the hive. If I move these frames back in with the rest of the colony's frames, they may be able to do a better job of keeping those hive beetles off. At the same time, although I mentioned the risk of that colony getting spread out, better for them to be in the same space than on opposite sides of the divider board and get caught by a cold snap. So we'll go ahead and put those back in. That gives them 3 full honey frames on this end, and that's in addition to 1 full honey frame on the other end. So now we've got our temperature sensor here. We'll put it right in the middle on top of our frame where we've got the mark. Now we're set up to take our measurements. I've already set up the app. I've got these thermometers already established in the app, along with our little module to send the information. We should be able to start receiving information from these pretty much right away. Now I just need to mount this thing in a safe place. It can actually sit up here for now, but I don't want to leave it there. It's not very heavy. It could potentially get blown away if we get a storm. So that's the report on the Shelley Hive. Not just what I've seen so far this year, but also what I hope to see in the next few months in terms of the temperature monitoring on that hive compared to the Layens hive. I think it's going to be really interesting, both of these hives being insulated, or at least having thick walls for the Shelley hive and the sheep's wool insulation on the Layens hive, and see how the two of them compare in terms of numbers and how well they moderate temperature fluctuations. I'm also pretty impressed with how responsive Shelley Hive was in terms of the modification for those cover boards, and I think that worked really well to give that additional bee space above the frames. Now, I've talked a lot in this video about things I said in that original video when I set up the Shelley Hive, but if you missed that video, you can go ahead and watch that right here. And if you did already see that video, you may be interested in this video that YouTube has selected especially for you. I also want to give a quick shout out to the members of this channel. I really appreciate your support. If you join this channel as a member, then you'll be able to see future videos earlier than most everybody else. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.